Be my victim. Be my victim.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 40.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one we got today.
40.
It's been a while since we've done one about a serial killer, so.
Yeah, we had actually been thinking that we've done like a bunch of paranormal ones the last 3 weeks, which is cool, but
yeah.
I wanted to kind of do a true crime one because we hadn't done one in so long.
Yeah, this one's out off your new book, isn't it?
Yes.
It's one of the cases from the new book.
Yes.
Right.
And you guys, if you like paranormal and stuff like that, you know, my new book, The Unseen Hand, which is out now, is a compilation. But the next book I'm working on is also a compilation, but it's going to be a compilation of unsolved murders, like kind of the creepiest unsolved murders of the 20th century. It's actually going to be 3 volumes, which I didn't really plan at the beginning, but I found so much stuff I wanted to write about that it was about 3 books worth. Yeah. So I'm working on the first volume right now, and this case is actually in there. And before we get into that,
it's called the Atlanta Ripper.
Yeah, right. That's what this case is called, the Atlanta Ripper. And I'll kind of get into it in a little bit. But before we do that, let's do our regular thing and give our shout out to Project Entertainment Network.
Yeah.
Who?
God, that's blowing up.
Yeah, like you guys, I don't even know why this happened, but our audio downloads of the audio podcast more than tripled.
Yeah, it's like 11,000 downloads now.
Yeah, in 1 month.
And really, it all happened in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, because it's like this month isn't even over yet.
It had something to do with the Ed and Lorraine show.
It seemed like
quadrupled instantly.
Yeah, there was like a huge spike after that Ed and Lorraine Warren. I had no idea like so many people were into Ed and Lorraine Warren.
And then they went back and started from the very beginning. Our very first show also skyrocketed, episode 1. And
the one that was about the entity in The Shining.
You can sit there and watch about 400, 500 people slowly going through from the first episode on up.
Going back and listening
to them in order. It's a trip.
So that's pretty rad. It's like, you know. I really appreciate all of our new listeners, and our old listeners too. Yeah. We appreciate all our listeners.
Yes, it looks like some of them spilled over onto the podcast also. Not podcast, the YouTube show.
The YouTube show, yeah.
But, okay. Unseen Hand, flying off the shelf. The audiobook is selling like crazy. We're tracking that. And some of them are people from our podcast, I think. But I think most of them are just people from members off Audible.
Yeah.
Just regular members.
It does seem, I'm like amazed at how many people actually bought that in audiobook.
Yeah.
It's killing me.
I know. And it's funny, it's like the ebook of it is just kind of flat.
Yeah. Like I said, I think I mentioned this on another episode, but it's
you never can tell.
You never can tell what format something's going to do well on. Maybe the Unseen Hand, maybe because it's long.
I don't know.
And there aren't a lot of other
there's only one
books.
review. There's only one audiobook. There's only one ebook review. That's probably what it is.
Yeah, maybe
most of the reviews are falling onto the
audiobook page, on Audible.
And another thing that's weird is that it's selling well in just regular print, hard copy.
Yeah.
Weird.
It is very strange.
But we'll see. We'll see how it turns out.
But yeah, we'll see how it goes. And like I said, if you guys have read it and liked it and stuff like that, then, if you want to leave a review on Amazon, that would be awesome.
Yeah, if you've read it on ebook, please leave a review.
Yeah, it does. It really does help because really they don't start selling until there's at least one review on there.
Yeah, there's one review. Actually, they started selling. The other one started selling when there was about 6.
Yeah,
when there's about 6 reviews, then they start selling.
Then they start selling. Yeah. But let's see what else was okay. I mentioned Project Entertainment Network. Oh, I also want to mention, and I think I mentioned this maybe not on last week's show, but on the one before, that we're gonna start doing like a more like a shorter version of our show.
13 o'clock in minutes.
Yeah, like not a version of the show. There won't be a voiceover and stuff, but we're doing more like a kind of a coolly designed, more list based.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like a list channel.
Yeah,
but it's gonna be really cool. And I've seen what Jenny's done so far. It's one of the best looking ones out there. I think it is the best looking one out there. It's going to be pretty neat.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and so, but it'll have the same kind of, there'll be paranormal stuff, true crime stuff, just, general weird shit like we usually do on the show. And, I'm working hard on it to make it look pretty. So I'm not entirely sure when the awards, because I'm going to put up a bunch of them at once.
Yeah, they're probably going to average about 5 to 10 minutes each one.
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep them under 10 minutes because, I know it's a lot to ask for people to sit and listen to us.
Right.
Listen to us yap for an hour.
Yeah, there's a whole market for channels that don't do anything but just little videos that are under 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we're going to do. And we're going to use that kind of promote the show and some of Jenny's books and things like that. But it's going to be legit. You guys will like it.
Yeah. I'm going to work really hard to make it look nice.
You ADD youngsters will love it.
Back in my day, we had to sit there and...
Okay, so...
God, we're old.
Anything else?
Okay, so, I think that's pretty much all
right, let's get to the Atlanta River.
Okay, now, this case has fascinated me since I heard about it. And I didn't hear about it that long ago. And the thing that I find the most interesting about it is how forgotten it is.
Yeah, it's a weird case.
And here's the thing. I've been working on, like I said, my new true crime book, which is going to be 3 volumes. But the first volume should be out before the end of this year, hopefully by the end of October. That's what I'm shooting for. It's called The Faceless Villain.
It should be out pretty quick. You're almost halfway through it.
Yeah, I'm almost halfway through.
Okay.
But so basically this first volume is going to be, 1900 to 1960 is the first one.
Yeah, and it's going to be a big one, probably another 350, 400 pages. Probably.
Yeah. So it's weird because I initially wrote, and I wrote them in, the cases, I write them in like chronological order, like each year, like whatever cases happened that year. And it's weird because I had written the 1911 chapter. And that case was the case of Elsie Perubeck. She was a little girl in Chicago that vanished and was found dead later on, and they never discovered who killed her. But while I was researching something else later on, I came across the case of the Atlanta Ripper. And I said, why did I never hear about this?
Yeah.
Because, I'll get into why. Probably most people never heard of it later on because there are some reasons. But, basically, this guy was like the American Jack the Ripper, and they think, by the most conservative estimate, he killed at least 8 women.
Yeah.
But it was probably more like 20.
There's something about this story that kind of reminds me of the movie Candyman.
Yeah, it is kind of like that.
Yeah, this was done by one of the witnesses said that he was a big old tall black guy with a long coat and a big old brimmed hat.
Wide-brimmed hat,
yeah. And it's kind of a cool story.
The reason why I think that it's kind of a forgotten case, largely, and even when I was doing a lot of research for the book and research for the podcast and stuff like that, there's really not a lot of information on it. And the reason for that is because it happened in Atlanta, Georgia, in the early part of the 20th century, and all of the victims were Black or mixed race women.
Yeah.
And according to witness, that they think the killer was probably Black as well, which, serial killers, like I said, just like they said in Silence of the Lambs, serial killers tend to hunt within their own ethnic groups. And so the few people that did see who they thought was the Atlanta Ripper, he was like a very tall Black man with a wide-brimmed hat. No one ever really gave a better description of him than that. And only 2 women saw him.
That lived.
Right. A lot of the confusion comes about. And even now, I think not so much now, but at the time, like a grand jury actually came to the conclusion that there was no Atlanta Ripper, that all of these women that got killed over this, 3 or 4 year period were all killed by different people, even though the MO in most of the cases was very similar.
Yeah, this would actually make a really good movie or a good book.
It would, and there is one book about
Law
it.
enforcement was turning a blind eye to it because they couldn't crack the case. And, they're back in those days, they're like, well, it's only Black people anyway. So,
Yeah, they didn't really...
there was a lot
honestly,
of that going on. It was a trip.
It didn't make the front page of the Atlanta newspaper until the 8th person was dead.
Right.
Like, before that... And actually, it's so... the early crimes in the series, if that's indeed what it was, were so neglected that no one really knows who this dude's first victim was.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the very first crime scene.
Okay.
What happened?
Well, see, like I said, they're not sure who the first victim was.
All right.
Most people, like, I've got like a bunch of different sources, but they all say something different, right? About who the first victim was. Because like I said, the murders tended to end up in like page 7 of the newspaper. It was like just 2 paragraphs.
Right.
Oh, some woman got her throat slashed. Who cares?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
Probably somebody did it and we don't care
Right.
who it is. They didn't investigate it. So they don't really know. Some sites say that the first victim was Rosa Trice, and she was found on January 22nd, 1911. However, I also uncovered this other paper, and it was written in 2013, and it's by Vance McLaughlin and Robert L. Bing III. Now, they had a list of 19 women that were killed in Atlanta around this time period. Now, they took a bunch of the victims out because the MO wasn't the same, or because someone was convicted of killing them, even if the conviction was questionable. Because there was some shit later on with, police beating confessions out of suspects and things of that nature. Now, they went with a very conservative estimate. So they think 8 women were definitely Atlanta Ripper. The other ones, maybe, maybe not. Now, they had the first victim being Maggie Brooks. And she was killed in October of 1910. However, when I was researching this for the book, there were actually 2 murders earlier than that. Like, one of them happened in 1909, like in spring of 1909. It was a woman named Della Reed, and they found her with her head bashed in, and they found her in a trash pile. So that might have been the same guy. And then they found another woman, and I believe this was, this was later on in 1909. They found another victim in Peachtree Creek, and she had her throat slashed. Now, she was unidentified. They never did figure out who that was. So there is a lot of controversy about who was the first victim.
Right.
And
these were probably all happening in high crime areas anyway.
Well, see, that's what's not real clear because, like I said, because the victims were black, they didn't really report on them much.
Right.
Like I said, it would be in the back of the paper or no one would really, because
didn't make front page.
No, it never did.
Right.
And honestly, in the case of the Atlanta Ripper, it didn't make the front page until so many women had been killed in a similar fashion that they thought it was the same person.
Yeah, the numbers piled up, and then all of a sudden it looked like a serial killer. But then later on, the cops and the courts are going, no, it's not a serial killer. It's not a serial killer.
Yeah.
That would mean that they'd have to find the guy.
Yeah.
And they weren't going to be, they never did find him.
No. Right. Now, they did arrest, at least 6 arrests were made for various murders, but they could never really pin it on anybody.
Right. And it's the same old story, back in those days, they're beating on these guys trying to get them to confess. And they're not the right guys.
And they think that definitely did happen in at least one instance. The problem was, like I said, there was a run from between about 1909 to about 1913, 1914. There was a huge spike in crime. And it was always, like I said, black or mixed race women. And they were not, this wasn't like a Jack the Ripper situation. They weren't prostitutes. They were all working women. They were cooks or servants. They were usually coming home from work. Yeah. Walking home. There were maids in people's houses and things like that. And they would just be walking home from work, minding their own business, or walking home to the grocery store, what have you. And generally what would happen, and they think the cases that are generally attributed to the Atlanta Ripper, he had a very specific MO. He would come up to the women in the street, usually from behind, and he would whack them on the head with a blunt instrument. He would drag them, because you could usually see where they'd been dragged, drag them into some bushes. Then he would usually either slash their throat so severely that they were almost beheaded, or he would stab them, like with a straight razor in the throat or something like that. And in some cases, he would mutilate their bodies some way worse than others.
Yeah, he was taking people's hearts out, too, sometimes.
One woman had her heart removed, Right. Another weird thing that he did was, in some cases, he would cut the women's shoes off.
Weird.
They don't really know why. Like, sometimes they would find the shoes nearby.
He must have had a foot fetish. He was trying to get to the foot
That's what
quick.
I'm thinking.
Wanted to see it.
Yeah. But in some of the cases, they never did find the shoes, but he always cut them off.
Yeah, he wanted to see whether or not they were flat-footed.
I don't know. Yeah, weird. I don't know what the deal
was. Kind of like Eddie Murphy's foot fetish.
Maybe he must have had a foot fetish.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was... So... And that didn't happen in every single case. And like I said, that's why there's like a lot of controversy about which victims could be attributed to him and which ones were not. Yeah. Okay, so there were two in 1909 that could have been him. Okay, and that was Della Reed and an unidentified woman they found in Peachtree Creek. Now in 1910, there were 7 murders that I could discover. Right now, a lot of these were not considered Ripper victims because a lot of them were shot, right? There was a woman named Georgia Brown. There was a woman named Rosa Rivers. These women were both shot. Now, the thing is, they never solved their murders, though. And there were some other, murders that were kind of more like a Ripper-style murder. Some of them didn't have their throat slashed, but some of them like had their skull bashed in, like with a blunt instrument or something like that, and were dragged off the street.
Now, this usually happened in a darkened street or darkened alley?
It's usually in the evening, because like I said, it would usually happen when the women were coming home from work in the evening, like usually between 7 and 9 p.m.
Why were there no witnesses?
There were a couple. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, it just seemed, I think that it was like women cutting through alleys and stuff like that, like on their way home, it seemed like.
Right.
So
the police reports, they don't give a whole lot of detail about the locations.
Yeah, not really. Like I said, because I think at the time the press was just kind of like, oh, well, it's just the black neighborhood.
Right, yeah, no, don't worry about it.
So
it's not our women.
They kill each other all the time. Right, so, because you have to think, in Atlanta at the time, Atlanta kind of liked, this was less than 50 years after the Civil War ended, really. As much as Atlanta kind of liked to put itself forward as kind of like the, bastion of tolerance and stuff. And actually, quote unquote, higher class black people did have, they owned businesses there and stuff and there was like a lot of booming industry.
You've heard it called like a black Mecca. It's where a lot of black people want to go.
Right. But the problem was, even so, it was only a very small percentage of black people in the city that had it good. Everyone else, there was still segregation. They couldn't eat in the same restaurants. They couldn't drink at the same water fountains. They had a poll tax. They were disenfranchising them from voting. And really it had only been in 1906, there was a huge race riot where a white mob kind of ran through the city and killed at least between 25 and 40 black men. Because of some trumped up kind of thing where they thought they were raping white women or some kind of shit like that newspapers made a big deal out of when it didn't actually happen. So, like I said, when these women started turning up dead, a lot of people just thought, oh, well, it's black men and you know how they do. Like, they get drunk on Saturday night and they kill their girlfriends, and that's just...
So they're lumping up that kind of accidental / domestic violence. They're mixing that in with they're trying to use that to cover up a serial killer.
Yeah. And they did that even after a lot of people got killed.
Right, yeah.
Like, some people still had that, because like you said, I think they didn't want to admit that they couldn't catch the guy.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I said, it wasn't the best environment, for this going on. So
whoever was doing it, of course, is exploiting that.
Well, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
They're exploiting the chaos and they're exploiting the racial strife, too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's big time.
So he knew what he was doing.
Yeah. And, okay, so, like I said, in 1910, there was a woman named Maggie Brooks, and she was a cook. She was 23. Most of the victims were very young. Most were very pretty.
Right.
Like I said, most of them, domestic servants, cooks, that type of thing. The first earliest victims, there were a bunch that were shot, and they're not sure if that's the Ripper. And then there were some whose heads were just bashed in, or they were found in a trash pile somewhere just with their heads bashed in and their throats not slashed. They could have been the Ripper, maybe not. They never did catch the people that did that either.
But what was unusual about the shootings is what? Just the frequency of them and the location?
Yeah.
So they think he may have started off shooting them. And then he may have started off and then bashing them. And then he got into slashing them like the Ripper.
Because it did seem like there was an escalation a little bit.
Yeah, there's no way to
prove me it seems like. But yeah, there's no way to prove that.
Probably is the same guy. Probably started off with the easy way. But then it's not satisfying enough.
Yeah.
Shooting him is not going to be not up and close and personal enough for this guy.
Yeah.
So then he hits him with rocks and bashes him and beats him up. But then that's not good enough for him. Then he moves on to sharp objects.
Yeah.
Something that's bloody,
Because that's the thing. Definitely whoever this guy was, he definitely had the same issues as Jack the Ripper.
Right.
And it should be said, just like in the Jack the Ripper case, the women were not raped, but they were often, the way that they were stabbed and the types of mutilations suggested that it was some kind of twisted sexual woman hating.
Well, he probably didn't have time, the location and the time. It was just violence.
Yeah. But okay, so now in 1911, it seemed like there were a few in 1911 that were shot, but then when summer of 1911 started, it started in about May, and there was a woman named Mary Bell Walker, and she was kind of walking home from work or whatever, and she got killed, and she had her throat slashed and stuff like that. It was only about a week or two later, there were two more victims, Addie Watts and Lizzie Watts, no relation. And these two, it was right around this time, so right about the summer of 1911, that the papers finally started to say, oh, maybe this is the same guy doing all of these. But it took that long because the first crimes were 1909, they think.
Right.
Like I said, they're not super sure. But it was summer of 1911, and these three crimes had happened like in the space of a month or so, and they were very similar with the throat slashed and everything like that. Also, but right around in 1911, there were also some complicating factors because there was a woman named Lucinda McNeil, and she was killed only 2 weeks after Rosa Trice was killed. And some blogs, there are some, things that I saw said Rosa Trice was the first victim, but like I said, there were a bunch before that. 2 weeks after Rosa Trice got killed, there was a woman named Lucinda McNeil, and she had her throat slashed with a straight razor. But the problem was that a bunch of witnesses had seen her husband killing her, or had followed him, after the murder or whatever, and found out that he did it. And he was actually convicted of that. So that kind of, complicated matters too, because there were a couple of, it seemed like, domestic incidents. Now, this one is the only one that it's pretty certain that her husband did it.
Right. Because
a lot of witnesses said, we saw them fighting and we followed them and, we saw him doing it. So that kind of fed into the people that wanted to say, oh, it's not a serial killer. Right. Every single one of these women was killed by a different person.
So this incident helped undermine this case as a serial killer case.
Yeah. And so like I said, there were a few of those. Like I said, the Lucinda McNeil one, like I said, I'm pretty sure that that's the only one that they actually know that the husband did it. Now, a few of the later crimes, like husbands or boyfriends were arrested or convicted or something like that, but they could never really pin it on them. Because most of the time the evidence was circumstantial and they didn't really, know if they really did it or not. They were just trying to pin it on somebody or make it look like it was all different people. I guess to keep it from being a panic or whatever. But like I said, I kind of feel like there was a serial killer. Yeah. It's just so weird that it's, in the case of Jack the Ripper, they know that was one dude. Right. At least those 5 murders, and maybe he did other ones. But those 5, they're sure it's the right guy. This one, I've never seen so much uncertainty about whether there was actually a serial killer or not.
I think there was.
Yeah. Well, and everything I've read seems to come to that conclusion. Like I said, the one paper from 2013 that I read, they had the most conservative estimate of the number of victims, but even then, they still had 8, and that's 3 more than Jack the Ripper.
Wow.
So that's still a bad serial killer. Even if he didn't kill 20 people, 8, that's still bad.
Yeah.
That's still more than Jack the Ripper. And Jack the Ripper is world famous, and the Atlanta Ripper is almost unknown.
Right.
Which kind of...
they even doubt his existence.
That's what I mean. And that's what made this case so interesting to me when I first stumbled across it. Because one, I was amazed I'd never heard of it before because I love true crime and I'm always reading about shit like that. But the fact that there's so much controversy over, how many of these people were actually killed by this person? Was there even a serial killer? Were all these 20 people killed by 20 different perpetrators, which in a way sounds ridiculous. But I guess at the time they kind of maybe thought that. I'll tell you what, let's take a break right now because it's almost at the halfway part. Yeah. And then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the Atlanta Ripper. We'll be back in just a minute.
I'm Captain Ballard. Wrestling, and I'm one of them characters in the curtain jerkers, Project Entertainment Network's Pro Wrestling Podcast. Every Friday, Token Top Clark, Steve Mesa, and the Viking Super Kick Pro Wrestling in the hot spot, featuring interviews with the up-and-coming indie superstars that are stable that shoots while it works. You can only hear them on the Project Entertainment Network. Thank you very much. Remember the Alamo!
Subculture Corsets and Clothing is our favorite store for unusual clothing, shoes, and accessories. They offer a wide selection of men's and women's clothing at great prices. Subculture also offers a cool selection of shoes and accessories. Steampunk, gothic apparel, retro, corsets, and so much more at Subculture Corsets and Clothing. Check out Subculture online at subculturecorsets.com. That's subculturecorsets.com. Make sure you use the discount code 13o'clock for a 10% discount. Subculturecorsets.com or visit their store in Jacksonville, Florida, just off I-95.
Project Entertainment Network presents Buttercup of Doom with your host, Kelly Owen, just a girl who writes horror and thriller fiction, talks to bugs, jumps in puddles, and now hosts a weekly podcast full of opinions, advice, and a touch of gypsy wisdom. Whether it's current affairs or social media nightmares, join me as I rant and rave and offer up a big old bucket of common sense. Wednesdays on Buttercup of Doom.
Okay, and we're back. So we were talking before about how it took until the summer of 1911 for them to actually admit that maybe there was a serial killer running around, and it actually made the front page of the paper after one of the victims, Addie Watts, got killed, and that was in June. That was June 16th, 1911. She was found, and the same thing happened to her. She had her throat slashed, she had her head bashed in, and things like that. And plus they started to notice a pattern. It was like, it usually happened on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Right.
A couple of them were Monday or Tuesday, but not usually. And it was usually on a weekend. Now, here was kind of a break in the case, right? July 1st, 1911. There's a woman named Emma Lou Sharp, and her mother, Lena Sharp, had gone to the grocery store. This was a Saturday night. Lena Sharp had gone to the grocery store, and she'd been gone for more than an hour. I mean, the market was just right down the street. So Emma Lou, she got worried because, there'd been all these murders going on, and she's like, she didn't know where her mother went. So she walks down to the market, and the people at the market say, well, she never got here.
Wow.
And Emma Lou was like freaking out. So she starts going back home. Now, on the way back home, this tall black man with a wide brimmed hat comes up to her in the street. Mm-hmm. And he says, how are you feeling tonight? Or something like that. Mm-hmm. And she's like, yeah, fine. And then she tries to get around him because he was kind of making her nervous, right?
Right.
And then he says to her, according to her, don't be afraid. I never hurt girls like you. And then he stabbed her in the back.
Wow.
And
this is during the daytime? Evening?
This was evening.
Evening time? So it was dark?
Not late evening, but it was evening. It was probably I think it was 7 or 8 o'clock at night.
Okay, so it was dark.
Yeah.
You did it in the dark. Okay.
And, naturally, she screamed and ran. Right. And a bunch of neighbors heard her and came out to help her.
And he ran off.
And no one saw her. All she saw that he was a very tall
black
guy with a wide brimmed hat.
And a long coat.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's all she remembered.
Wow.
I mean, as you would.
That's how you'd imagine the Ripper.
Yeah. So it's almost like he seemed like a phantom, and it's like creepy. Right. And they said, and she said that when he stabbed her, he was like laughing.
Huh. Wow.
Now, she lived.
Yeah.
However, after the stabbing, they started looking for her mother, and they found her mother dead. Close by.
Wow.
Only a block away, and her head had been almost cut off.
Wow.
So this poor woman had got stabbed in the back by this guy, and this guy had probably killed her mother less than an hour before.
And they found her body off of the beaten trail?
Yeah, right near there.
Okay, so something diverted her from going to the store?
Well, generally what would happen, like I said, they think that he approached his victims from behind and hit them over the head and then dragged them.
Took them somewhere.
And then took them somewhere, like, not far away.
Hmm.
Yeah, so this poor woman, man, it's like, that's the most horrible thing. But that's probably the most famous aspect of the case, of him saying, you know, don't be afraid, I never hurt girls like you, and then stabbing her. Now, she did live, but her mother was not so lucky.
This would have made an awesome 1970s, like, blaxploitation flick.
Yeah.
It would have. Like a slasher.
Yeah.
From that time.
I'm surprised, like I said, I'm surprised they haven't made a movie about this. But
because it was a historical thing that happened.
Yeah.
But there's not a whole lot of details there. You could fill in the blanks and make a really good slasher movie on something like this.
Yeah. I mean, because because like you said, that it's such a vague case. Yeah. And even the newspapers of the time, because I've read like a lot of the different newspapers like the different newspapers said different shit.
Right.
Because, okay, so the story I just told you about Emma Lou Sharp, about getting stabbed in the back, another newspaper, I think it was the Atlanta Constitution, another newspaper in the same fucking city at the same time, said that wasn't how that went. They said that Emma Lou and her mom were walking to the store together. Right. And they both got jumped on by this guy, and he, like, killed the mom and then stabbed, and everybody was screaming and stuff like that. Right. And she got away. But most of the other sources I read said no, she went looking for her mother later and then met the guy. But, you know, so that shit happened. And then there was another woman, allegedly. Now, she didn't get hurt, but she thinks she might have seen him. Now, this was about a week later. It was the following Saturday night. It was July 8th, 1911. And there was a girl named Mary Yeldell, and she was 22, and she was a cook also. And she left the house where she worked, and she was walking past an alley, and she heard someone whistle. And she stopped and looked because she thought someone was trying to get her attention. And she saw the same thing. She saw a very tall black man in a hat. She couldn't really see his face that good because he was in the alley, and he was running at her. Right. She said he had a quote unquote cat-like tread. Yeah. So it was almost like Spring-Heeled Jack.
Well, he must have been pretty young.
Yeah. I would guess. So he like runs toward her. So she screams and she runs back to the house where she worked and told her boss, hey, the Ripper is out here. Right. And the guy comes out with his gun and ran to the alley, and the guy was still standing there, but he was like in the shadows. Mm-hmm. Right. So the guy that she worked for, W.M. Seltzer was his name. He told the guy, hey, put your hands up or whatever. And the guy just took off down the alley. Wow. And like I said, he couldn't shoot him.
This would have made a good movie.
That's what I mean. I don't know why they never made it.
They should have did it back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
You know. Actually, instead of making Candyman, they should have made this movie.
Well, what? Yeah, but Candyman was a good movie.
It was a good movie. Yeah. That's how I'm kind of picturing it. You know what I mean? Kind of like a Jack the Ripper story, kind of like Candyman.
Yeah, I was like, if somebody made this into a movie, it would be like Candyman, like mixed with From Hell. Yeah. Like with, I don't know, something else. Yeah. I'm surprised no one's actually made this into, and like I said, I'm surprised that it's not better known. Right. Because some of these crimes were pretty horrible. I mean, they were pretty similar to the Jack the Ripper type victims. I mean, one of them had her heart cut out when she was disemboweled and stuff like that. And he killed more people than Jack the Ripper did. Right. And they never caught him.
Never caught him.
So you know, for some reason, it's just
there's a lot of leeway there. You could make a legendary kind of a villain character based on that. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
I know. That's what I mean. I was, you know,
because some people were doubting whether or not he even existed.
Yeah, so it's almost like there's almost like that weird phantom aspect,
like quality. Yeah, and he ran like a cat. Wow,
that's what she said.
Wow, that's kind of cool.
But that's what I mean. It's like it's almost
he was fast and silent. Yeah, moving with power.
Yeah. So she didn't get killed, even though clearly this Mary Yeldell girl, she was clearly intended as the next victim because he did come running at her. Yeah. But she didn't get killed. She was fine. And, you know, other than psychological trauma. Yeah. But, so that was the first thing that broke this kind of streak, because for a while, someone got killed every Saturday night. Like a woman got killed. They were all women. There were no male victims. Right. And they were all about the same age. Well, I think the oldest one was 40 that they think was him. So no one got killed that Saturday night because she got away. However, on the Tuesday morning, which was July 11th, a bunch of workers were coming to work on a sewer, like at this intersection. and they see a puddle of blood in the road. And with a trail, and they follow the trail, and in a gully nearby they find a body. And the girl's name was Sadie Holly. She worked at a laundry. Her head had been almost cut off. And she also had her shoes cut off. They didn't find her shoes. They did find she had like 2 combs in her hair that she'd been wearing, and they found one on one side of the road and one on the other side of the road.
Her combs?
Yeah, the combs she'd had in her hair. So I don't know if he just hit her and they went flying, or...
He did have a foot fetish then. He's taking the shoe.
Yeah. He didn't do it in every case, but in a few of the cases.
He liked her shoes.
Yeah, for some reason. And he cut them off. He didn't take them off. Here's the thing about the murder of Sadie Holly. And this probably goes to demonstrate, the panic that was setting in the community, because the Black community was starting to flip out because they said, no one's doing anything about this. They were trying, all the churches in the area were trying to raise money for rewards. They were trying to encourage the police to put on some Black detectives. Right, yeah. Because, the white guys weren't coming down there. Yeah, and so they couldn't really effectively patrol the area. And like I said, they didn't really beef up any patrols until, all of these other murders had taken place. Like I said, it was like the 8th or 9th victim at this point. And like I said, there's some confusion too about, was this the 7th victim? Was this the 9th victim? They don't know. Now, Sadie Holly, it turned out that the day after her body was found, which was the Tuesday, they arrested a guy named Henry Huff. Now, the reason they arrested him and the only reason they arrested him was because somebody said that they had seen him with Sadie Holly on Monday night and that they had been arguing. I think it was a cab driver. And that was the only reason. They said and the cops said they picked him up. Oh, and he had a scratch on his arm or something like that. And his pants were dirty or, who knows? It was something like that. So he was a 27-year-old guy. Here's the thing. They held him on suspicion, but they knew they didn't have enough evidence to convict him, right? And it seemed like even the press were getting annoyed. And I'm sure the press still printed really racist shit all the time because that was just a matter of course, right? Yeah, back then, yeah. But even then, and this kills me. I read this on a different blog about this. But it said even at the time, when they printed something that a Black person said, they printed it in that kind of to make it sound phonetic, how they talked and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. In other words, they wrote it out in Ebonics. Yeah, retro, pretty much. Old-fashioned Ebonics. Right. So yeah, even in that case, the newspapers were still, we don't think that guy was the killer. Right. And even the newspapers, didn't think the police were doing that good a job. So they arrested this guy. They held him on suspicion. The papers were like, whatever. And that's probably not him. They also arrested another guy named Todd Henderson. He was, at a bar. They picked him up in Decatur Street. Now, another witness said that they had seen Henderson with Sadie Holly, the woman who got murdered, and that he had seen them at a drugstore the day before she got killed or something like that. Now, in the case of Todd Henderson, they brought in Emma Lou Sharp, the girl that had been stabbed in the back, to see if she could identify him. One newspaper said that when she heard his voice, because she heard him talking to her, that she shrank back and she was afraid. She's like, yeah, that's him. I think that's him. However, another newspaper reported that she wasn't sure that it was him. So nobody knows if she identified Todd Henderson as the guy that had stabbed her. Because one newspaper said one thing and another newspaper said, oh, I don't know if that's him. You know what I mean? Could they place him at the scene at the time? No. There were some other things that might have been, I think Todd Henderson was the guy that said, oh, I don't have a straight razor or anything like that. But then somebody said, oh, he dropped off a straight razor to be sharpened at the barber shop or whatever. There was not enough evidence to convict him either, to even arrest him, really. I mean, he was held on suspicion. And the problem, too, was that while these guys, there was another guy named, I think his name was Daniel or something like that. That was his last name. They kind of held him on suspicion too. But the problem is, while these 3 guys were being held on suspicion and under were being investigated, there were more murders.
Right. So murders were taking place.
Yeah. So it's like,
so they had the wrong guys.
Yeah. So it's like either and the thing about Henry Huff is that they only held him on suspicion for Sadie Holly's murder. They didn't held him on suspicion for being the Ripper.
Right.
They thought maybe he just killed her and that was it. And then they didn't even have enough evidence to
pin it on him.
Pin it on him for that. So the thing is, who fucking knows? I don't know. But they had like all these rewards, all this other stuff, and nothing was helping. There was also, and I think I mentioned this a little bit before, the city recorder, who was a local magistrate in Atlanta. Now he was of the belief that every single one of these murders was a different person.
Right.
So he did not believe that there was any serial killer.
Okay.
And he kind of came out and said, because people were like, well, yeah, but there's patterns, like they're done the same way, and it's like they all happened on Saturday night and all this other stuff. And he said, oh, it's because Saturday night is the black man's big night. Like he gets tanked up and then decides he's going to kill his woman because she's been unfaithful or she's mouthing off or something like that.
That's what he said. That was
more or less. That's what he said. Yeah. He said
this would make an awesome movie.
I know. And it's like, it really would. I don't know why they don't do it. Yeah.
Awesome.
So he said that's his big night. So so all these different people, and then they're just like using this serial killer thing, like just to blame it on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not helping the case was also, one of the guys that was arrested for the crimes, I believe it was Todd Henderson, they were questioning him about the Ripper murders. And he said, if I was the Ripper, I would have started with my wife because she's giving me so much trouble.
Right.
That's not how they printed it in the paper. They printed it like you said, like stupid Ebonics or whatever, but that's what he said. And, so this guy, this Nash Broyles person, the city recorder that said this about them getting tanked up and stuff like that, he actually said, quote, there are at least 1,000 Negro men in Atlanta today who stand ready to cut the throats of their wives at the slightest provocation.
Damn!
He said that in the paper, quote unquote.
Damn.
So, yeah. So he thought that there was no serial killer. Okay. So, however, like I said, while these three men were under investigation or whatever, there was another murder, August 31st. And this was Marianne Duncan. She was found west of Atlanta on some railroad tracks, and her throat had been cut from ear to ear. Then there was another murder as well, Minnie Wise. And this happened in November. Oh, there was one called Eva Florence too, but they're not sure if that was a Ripper murder. But the one named Minnie Wise, they found her in November, and she had her shoes removed and her throat was cut. And also the index finger on her right hand was cut off at the joint. Like just her finger. They took it. I don't know why. At this point.
It must have had a ring on it.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure no one ever thought robbery was a motive because these were all poor women, but
well, no, it might have been a trophy.
Yeah, true. Okay. That was the only one where a finger was taken, though. Right. Like there were other mutilations on some of the other bodies, but that was the only one where the finger was taken. Now, the thing about Minnie Wise, though, is that later on, her husband, Bud, was arrested for the murder. And so it's almost kind of like, did he kill her and make it look like a Ripper murder? Because there could have been copycats, too. And, that's another possibility. Well,
let me ask you this. These murders, was this a spike in homicide?
It does appear that it was.
It was not the normal baseline.
Right.
Okay.
According to everything I read, like I said, since crimes where blacks were the victims, were not generally investigated very well or weren't really reported on very much.
Right.
They're not entirely certain, but it does seem like from 1909 to 1914, there was this huge spike and all the victims were of a similar age women, right, and they were found in similar situations.
I'm pretty sure it's a serial killer.
It does really sound like a serial killer. And like I said, even if the most conservative estimates turn out to be true, he killed at least 8 women, at least.
Right.
And it was probably more like shading more toward 20.
Wow.
And like I said, this is why it kills me that there's not. And it also kills me that they thought that maybe that there wasn't a serial killer. That freaks me out. Okay, so the mayor's office, at this point, like I said, now after Minnie Wise got killed, and like I said, they maybe it was her husband, they don't know. But they sent out a letter, like the police department was really embarrassed and stuff because the Atlanta Ripper story went national at this point. You know, a lot of the papers were saying, what's the matter with the Atlanta police? They can't catch this guy, blah, blah, blah. And then a week after it went national and the Atlanta police were trying to like kind of save face, going, hey, big cities have these kind of things and we're trying and all this other kind of stuff. Then this was the worst murder. This is kind of like I said, is a ramping up, just like Jack the Ripper. You know, Jack the Ripper's last victim, she got totally disemboweled. She was just all cut up and she was all fucked up. And this was the same thing that happened here. This time, this happened on November 23rd, and her head was almost cut off, and her chest was cut open, and her heart was pulled out and put next to her. Right? That's Mary Putnam, and I think she was also the oldest. Like, I think she was 40. At this point, like, after this, which was probably the grossest of the murder scenes, some of the police detectives started blaming the black community, saying, you guys aren't doing enough to catch this guy.
Right, yeah.
You know, because like I said, the cops were just, they obviously couldn't catch anybody. So then they were starting to blame the victims, essentially, saying, why don't you guys do something to catch them? Since obviously they're not doing that much of a good job. But so the summer of 1911, that was kind of the summer and fall of 1911, that was kind of the worst. But there were a few after that. They found a few more in 1912. A couple of these, like Ida Ferguson, she was found in early 1912. And they think maybe that was her boyfriend. Now, her boyfriend was convicted, Lucky Elliott. He was convicted of that. But the evidence, kind of circumstantial. Same deal with Pearl Williams, who was found on January 19th. They also convicted somebody for that. It was a guy who apparently was in love with her and said, you know, if I can't marry you, no one will, blah, blah, allegedly. So they're not sure, but she was found the same way, throat slashed, all that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of suspecting that she's probably a Ripper victim also.
So they probably put a couple innocent guys behind bars.
Right, yeah.
Now, what happened to the murders? Did they eventually just kind of peter out?
Yeah, what ended up happening, there was one in February 1912, which was Alice E. Owens. Now, her husband, Charlie Owens, was convicted of that, although, like I said, they think maybe the confession was beaten out of him. So, but he went to jail regardless. Now, there were two more. In April 1912 and in May 1912. Neither of these women was ever identified, and one of them was a 15-year-old girl. They found her floating in a creek, like her throat had been slashed and someone had thrown her in the creek.
Nobody came forward saying, that's my daughter or anything, huh? Weird.
It's weird because several of these were not, there were actually, I think there were four that were unidentified. Women. Yeah, one of the last ones was a 15-year-old girl. And they found her in the Chattahoochee River.
But there's no definite link with those last two ones.
The MO was similar. Their throats were cut in a similar fashion. Yeah. Right. And it was right around the same time period.
To me, it sounds like there was a serial killer.
It does definitely sound like
the cops couldn't catch the guy.
Yeah.
They didn't want to admit that they couldn't catch this guy, though.
That's what I mean. So they did put people in jail.
Right.
Okay. The guy that was beaten, the confession was beaten out of him, that was actually a man named Brown. And he went to trial for killing Eva Florence, who was found in October 1911. So he got acquitted, though. Okay, so the last one they think, like I said, is a 19-year-old girl in May 1912. And they think that was the last one. There was another one in March 1913, a girl named Laura Smith. And she was a servant also, a young mixed race girl, and she was a servant. And they found her dead. Now, they think maybe that was the last one, was Laura Smith. And that was 1913, which maybe was 4 years after the first one, if they started in 1909. Now, here's what's weird, though. In 1914, firefighters started finding these little notes, like pinned around the city, purporting to be from the Atlanta Ripper. And all the notes said, I'm going to cut the throats of all Negro women who were out on the streets after a certain time. So they don't know. So much like Jack the Ripper, taunting the police and stuff like that, they don't know if the actual killer left these notes.
Or if it was a copycat.
Or if it was a copycat or a prank, or who knows. Because what ended up happening was that someone would leave the note and then someone would call in an alarm at a firebox.
Okay.
And then the firefighters would go to the firebox and find that note there.
Right.
So they don't know if it was just a prank.
Right. Sounds like a prank.
But yeah, it's a pretty sick prank. But but like I said, they don't really know if the Jack the Ripper letters were really from the person killing him. Although he did send them that kidney, didn't he?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
At least one was.
At least one of them was. Now, and after that, like, so the murders they think stopped in 1913. And then there were the notes, like a year after that. And then...
But when the notes appeared, there weren't any murders, were there?
No.
Yeah. I don't think...
I kind of feel like that probably wasn't the killer.
Right.
Because the thing is, even though nowadays, the murders are, largely forgotten about, they said actually the murders were big news for a couple of years after that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they kept referring back to it and things like that. But for some reason...
I bet you he moved out of the area.
Maybe he did.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think they made a total of 6 arrests. And I don't even think they arrested anybody for being the Ripper. They would just arrest a person for one murder.
Right.
And then I think only one was convicted, and it was just a conviction of one murder because somebody saw him or whatever. Right. And I don't think they had any idea who this dude was. And I don't even think they ever had him in custody. I don't even think those guys that they had in custody, I don't even think it was them.
Right.
So it's just kind of a case where, like I said, people are just like still fascinated with Jack the Ripper because they never caught him and stuff like that. But this guy killed way more people than Jack the Ripper in just as horrible a fashion.
Yeah.
And it's like forgotten about.
I think he thought he was Jack the Ripper.
I kind of feel like that too, because you have to think, I mean, the Jack the Ripper murders, that wasn't that long ago. I mean, it happened if it started in 1909, that was just, when the Jack Ripper murders were 1888, right?
I think he was inspired by Jack the Ripper.
That's what he might have been.
But I think he was saw himself as like living higher on the hog. Why go after hookers when you can go after good girls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he definitely
like
did seem to have...
His standards were higher. He was trying to be more of a, what's a good way to put it? More daring. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Attacking like respectable working women.
Right. More
rather
villainous.
than, Maybe he did. Maybe he
That's
did
the way
feel
he
like
saw
that.
himself, yeah. Weird.
I'd be kind of fascinated to see what this guy's psychology was, though, because it just seemed like,
yeah.
And I mean, if the woman that got stabbed in the back, Emily Sharp, I mean, if that was him, which I'm imagining it was, because why would some random dude just come up and stab you? But, for him to just stab her and laugh, and he didn't really seem to be worried about getting caught or anything. It was just like in the middle of the street. She was just going to the market. Kind
of like a kamikaze style attack. He probably at the moment, at the time he did, he probably didn't care whether or not he got caught per se.
Yeah.
It's just a thrill kill. And then he makes it, and then he escapes, and he goes, whew, man, that was close.
Maybe like you said, he got off on the thrill. Because, I mean, Jack the Ripper kind of did the same thing, where he would just kill people in the street.
And then he'd simmer down for a few weeks, then he'd go out and get another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, some kind of hatred towards women.
It must have been, because
hatred towards good girls.
Yeah, I guess so. Because like I said, all the victims were, pretty young girls, all worked. Yeah. Servants, cooks, things like that. Laundry women just walking home from work.
Ted Bundy kind of said the same thing, that that he had high standards, that he went after college girls, who were pretty and didn't do anything wrong. He said that guys that went after hookers, they were bottom feeders, cowards. That's the way he put it.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Because, the serial killers do tend to go after prostitutes and homeless girls and stuff. Just because I guess they feel like it'll be easier for them not to get caught. One, because they'll go with you and you don't have to do anything, really. And plus...
Ted Bundy called them bottom feeders.
Yeah.
Serial killers that did that didn't have any mojo. But they were weak men.
Yeah.
Weird. Yeah.
I don't get... Serial killer psychology is fascinating, but it's also, like, really disturbing to me. And this guy, like I said, they know so little about this guy. And they don't even know how many people he killed. They don't know why. They don't know why he started. They don't... You know what I mean? And so...
Ego.
Yeah.
Ego.
It's just, I don't know. I just found this a really fascinating case. And the most fascinating thing about it was that I hadn't heard of it before.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm into serial killers and true crime and stuff like that. Yeah. And I just kind of came across it accidentally, and I'm like, God, why don't more people know about this case?
All right.
That's crazy.
It's kind of like an Errol Flynn style guy who comes running in, knife you in the back, and then split, kind of a Phantom of the Opera style.
That's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking of like a Phantom of the Opera looking guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, creepy. Yeah.
All right, we can wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay. This was a very disturbing episode, but an interesting show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And like I said, if you enjoyed it, it's going to be in my new book, which will probably be out before October, which is called The Faceless Villain. And it's about creepy unsolved murders from the 20th century. And the first volume is going to be 1900 to 1960. So this is going to be in it, Axemen in New Orleans, all that good stuff. And let's see. Once again, shout out to Project Entertainment Network. You guys are doing a great job over there. And thank you very much for the spike in our listenership, which had really came with the Ed and Warren show, which I guess you guys really like. We'll do some more.
Yeah, we'll have to do a haunting episode.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do that too.
We're definitely going to do another one. There's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do another one. And also, my book, The Unseen Hand, is out. If you're into poltergeist, paranormal type stuff. Go check that out and leave me a review if you like it. Thank you.
It's going to be a bestseller in audio.
Very much. Yes, it is. I've already sold a lot of copies, so thank you everybody that bought one of those. And that'll do it for this week's episode. We will see you next Tuesday. Bye.
The river